we will eventually consume less because there won't be anything left to consume at some point.
Sa-
Um,
Save the earth by buying luxury goods.
Save the earth by completely killing all wildlife,
Yeah,
plants.
yeah.
Then we'll really learn how to survive. Maybe we can bring up some Soylent Green or some other kind of manufactured product. So I think in the back of my mind, and ever since we talked about doing this, one of the things that kind of always stays in the back of my mind was is Freeman Dyson and what he always talked about with nuclear power. And I bring this up not because we've really talked much about nuclear power, but he thought it was one of the greatest things in the world. Like when we were sending stuff up in space, when we were testing out nuclear fission and all the different things that are going on with. I'm not that kind of scientist. I'm the kind that plays video game scientist. But he thought it was one of the greatest gifts to humanity, nuclear power and being able to use nuclear resources until he saw the fallout of nuclear energy that was not that was sloppily used. And this was way before Chernobyl. This wasn't something like, oh, just because of this breakdown, but like this was in the 70s, in the late 60s. He came to the conclusion that nuclear energy can't be the be all end all for energy conservation. But I guess in the back of my mind, always while we're talking about energy and stuff, I'm like, let's just go nuclear. Let's just enjoy life and not worry about gas and stuff like that. So this is where you're going to tell me, in Matt Jensen's version, maybe not Freeman Dyson's version, but Matt Jensen's version, why can't we just rely on nuclear energy to take care of everything for us?
I think that you can rely on nuclear energy to take care of everything.
What? No, you just completely contradicted Freeman Dyson.
So,
He's smarter than me. Well, you are too, but go ahead.
so like for instance, the biggest nuclear catastrophe in the U.S. is considered 3 Mile Island, and it was built correctly, so it's fully contained. And I think there's 4 nuclear reactors on 3 Mile Island. One of them had that meltdown. It's fully contained. It's not usable, but it just sits there. So it's not like people died from it. So uh, yeah, it's
So,
it's hard for so Bill Gates is funding a nuclear reactor, small modular nuclear reactor in Wyoming that's going to be built over the next couple of years. And that's the first one of its kind. China is building them also. And I think they have plans to build like 100 over the next couple of years. So big time. The small modular nuclear reactors might have like produce like 100 megawatts versus 1300 megawatts. So it's kind of like a smaller scale, and there's less grid complexity to it. So um, I I really do see that as a positive development for nuclear power in the U.S. Like I think we have 2 plants under construction in the U.S. For nuclear right now. I think both of them are in Georgia, but and those are full scale. And then there's the one in Wyoming, but that's smaller version. But it's nuclear is really uh, a solution.
we have some in New Mexico too, right?
Yeah, but those are existing. Like they're just not
Okay,
built. Yeah.
gotcha. So they're not necessarily safe in the same kind of way.
Well, no, they're like, as far as I know, all the ones that we have built in operation in the US right now are entirely safe. So,
And maybe it's the other side of consumption of being an American, where the longest running TV show, The Simpsons, and we see Homer Simpson continuously find ways to scare the world from a nuclear disaster. Uh, like, what are the chances of I know we can't know exactly without all the specs and everything, but other than, I mean, human error is probably going to be 100% of the problem if anything did happen. But we see things like Chernobyl, we see things like a 3 Mile Island. Other than humans being completely stupid, you're saying that the accidents that the issues that came up with those different tragedies are more or less able to be circumvented unless people are being stupid.
Yeah, pretty much.
Oh wow, that's
So in Fukushima too wasn't, I think Fukushima's been totally blown out of proportion, but uh, Fukushima was built without some basically structural safety design stuff. So it's just, so like Germany's in the midst of an energy crisis right now. It's the highest that electricity costs have ever been, as far as I'm concerned. And I think they've shut down 2 or 3 nuclear plants this year. So it's just it's it's I don't really get the whole anti-nuclear stuff. That's just something that I haven't necessarily found a way to understand. And like the biggest I think issue with that is people that have nuclear power plants that can enrich uranium and create nuclear weapons out of it. If you have nuclear weapons, nobody's going to invade your country. So it's just kind of like that's a big powerful thing that you can kind of have in your hip pocket. After the fall of the Soviet Union, Ukraine had a stockpile of nuclear weapons, same with Kazakhstan, and they returned them to Russia. There was a lot of concern that those might fall in the wrong hands. So they optionally returned them. And, it's just kind of like Ukraine, there's probably a lot of things that could have played out where Ukraine would have been invaded. Like there's a lot of complexities there with basically the last 6 to 8 years. So they had that Minsk agreement in 2014 that was supposed to lead to a ceasefire. It didn't really lead to a ceasefire. There were still the separatists in the Donbass region that were Russian backed, fighting with the Western Ukraine forces or the rest of Ukrainian forces, the government forces. But I had Western Europe not been so vulnerable and reliant on Russian energy and minerals, and had Ukraine definitely had nuclear weapons, I don't see that they would have been invaded. This is definitely not an advocation to have them have nuclear weapons,
right.
but I know that some people were talking about potentially having that, or supplying Ukraine with nuclear weapons, and also the talk of NATO as kind of a mission creep right up to the borders of Russia, probably really felt pushed the Russians to a point where, or at least Putin, where he thought he had to act, and now we kind of have this disastrous situation. So very unfortunate. So,
And I think and I don't know if this needs to just be said every episode, there's not really a political bent towards one side or the other when on the discussions we'll have. In fact, you might find if you agree with everything that we say, you'll be on every, you'll be left, you'll be right, you'll be down the center, you'll be reactionary, you'll be revolutionary. Because as Matt has mentioned multiple times over on several of these issues, which are all connected, and there's several other things we haven't even tipped on, because they're all connected. You can't really just have a one for all stance and have any kind of chance whatsoever to help provide practical and living solutions to these issues.
Yeah.
I know we've talked about like Biden's administration, but some of these things were put in place a long time before Biden, and we're seeing capstone ideas, or he's finally executing ideas that have been in the works for decades. It's not something like he just came up with it and all of a sudden we're changing everything. And it's because when I'm just through some of this conversation, I'm thinking of some stuff that under Clinton's presidency, how we're seeing some of the conclusions, or the not conclusion, but some of the results of the decisions that were made now, just listening, talking with you about some of this stuff. So it's not really, and then also you have the
It's like
Bushes.
everybody,
Yeah,
like
yeah, it's a constant thing.
geopolitics is more than just the event that occurs.
Right. And I mean, we talked about, when the Soviet Union broke up, and now we're talking about someone else in that area. There's so much more, there's so many layers, if you take Shrek's proverbial onion, there's so many different layers that are on top of each other. And it's just that you can never get to the center of this onion. There's going to be, when you get to that center, you're going to find something else that needs to be peeled back and reconstituted and stuff.
Yeah, I think well,
go
just a quick note. I think historical note. I think it was in 1991 where NATO essentially had an agreement with Russia that they wouldn't extend farther east than Germany. So that's a long time ago, and we're really kind of seeing the effects here. I was traveling in Romania in 2016. And our U.S. funded missile system went on at the same time I was there, and I was like, "Whoa! I didn't know that we were putting U.S. missile systems in Romania." And it was just kind of like an interesting discussion with the Romanians and like my friends over there, and we there was a bunch of us there from Europe, the US. Let's see. Yeah, I think it was just Western and Eastern Europe and the US. There might have actually been a Ukrainian there too, but we were kind of all over the place. And I remember having an interesting discussion on this thing. It was just kind of like, that's interesting. So a bunch of
Right.
weapons pointed at Moscow, right?
Yeah, and it's interesting how NATO's history with all this is also just really, really interesting. And no matter what side you fall on with NATO, I read a couple books, I think it was 2 years ago, and they were both coming from Trump's administration, the people who wrote these books. One of them was General Mattis. And one of the things that really kind of opened my eyes, even though, I mean, we do this all the time everywhere else. If you're a Michael Jordan Chicago Bulls fan, you still have to decide, which year of his championships is your favorite, and to be a real true diehard fan. And even though there's 6 championships
All
between,
of them.
yeah. And then there's people like that. And there's people like, no, I only like the 1996 Chicago Bulls. I don't really care about the rest of them. People that have similar feelings towards these ideas might have completely different ways of what that means. Like General Mattis and President Trump both agreed that dismantling NATO was a very important thing to do, but they had 2 completely different ways of how they believe that should work out.
Oh, that's interesting.
Mattis was very much in his own biography or his biography as Secretary of Defense was very much not defense, Secretary of, was it Secretary of Defense? Oh goodness,
or
that's
yeah, or the
his position in the
Joint
cabinet.
Chiefs.
Yeah, he was very much for dismantling NATO, but he believed it needed to take a 10 to 15 year kind of framework to not do it quickly. Whereas President Trump was very much in favor of, "Hey, let's get rid of it now. Bye, NATO." you know? And so even as we talk about these things, you might find that you're in complete agreement with Matt on something, but Matt's version and your version of understanding how quickly and how absolutely some of those things might happen, that they differ some, and that's good for us. It's good to have a variety of understandings of how some of these things are work, and unfortunately, there's not just one answer that issues everything. Um,
Yeah. I personally don't know where I don't personally know what to necessarily think about um, what role NATO should be in on the world. You know, they're kind of, I've always grown up as they're like this beacon of freedom that protects
right.
Western Europe, but it's just, it's complicated, and it's just a complicated world. So, but like I don't remember who was saying it. It was some politician, and it might have been Biden saying that we're not going to go to war, but if anybody goes to war, it's going to be NATO. And considering that we're the biggest funder of NATO, I kind of view that as us being in essentially a world war with Russia if that were to occur over Ukraine. So it's just kind of, I don't, I'm maybe not informed enough on it, but I've looked at recent years, like the push from Emmanuel Macron of France, Merkel, and some of these other people to have a European army as a um, positive point in the direction. So is that a bad thing to say? I
No,
don't
no,
know.
no. I'm just saying you're saying such potentially controversial things. Well, and that's one thing that I love about history. It's so interesting how sure we were, how certain we were, X amount of years ago about something, and now we're kind of like, yeah, that was pretty stupid. Um,
Always,
um,
always happens.
and it, in fact, I know you know this. Last year, I read a book on every single president of the United States, and I read Biden's first. It was I was on purpose on first because I wanted it before he actually came into the presidency. It was kind of like what they expected, and the line it was in the preface was, "Biden might go down as the most boring president in the history of the United States," and that was kind of like, and because I know at the for the the world we live in, he's considered. We're talking about pre-election, or pre actually serving in office. Most of the people on the liberal side are like, he's not liberal at all. He's almost a hawk, in their version of what he's like. I mean, there was so much controversy when AOC mentioned that the New York delegates went for Bernie and stuff, and like, oh my goodness, you're trying to break up the Democratic Party and stuff because he's not liberal enough. And then all the people that are on the right side are like, no, he's the most liberal person ever. Now, again, until you actually take office and start making policies, it's kind of interesting to see where those lie. And some of the things you mentioned, like, hey, I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to do this. And then he goes and does that, which is very much non-Democrat. And then the other
Well,
side,
what is Democratic and Republican?
right,
I feel
right.
it switches every single
It feels like
country.
that too. But that's kind of what the beauty of it is that they're every single president, every single world leader. We'll talk specifically about energy. Every single one of them that have ever made a public statement about energy has been absolutely correct and incorrect at the exact same time.
Yeah.
It's just we didn't know it maybe at that time. And I think some of these stuff, and Putin's the sexy dictator right now that everybody's like, oh, it's Putin, and people are backtracking from what they've said either 4 years ago or 8 years ago, and or 16 years ago. No, it really just depends on which version of Putin you're wanting to compare to. But I kind of think of, what if he does conquer all? Let's say the world becomes Plutonia, and but what kind of world is that going to look like? I mean, if we don't have renewable energy in the same way, if everything is actually conquered, everything is in this kind of world, and not just him specifically, but because he's the one that we're talking about. What's energy going to look like in a world where where you've got these little rebel groups trying to take down this person who does this? I mean, it seems like such an extreme thing, but we've seen similar examples in Venezuela. We've seen similar examples in Georgia, back in the aughts and stuff, of what these power fights look like. And it's, half of my friends are all scared that World War III is going to happen any second. And then the other half of my friends are like, well, if it happens, we're screwed anyway, so might as well consume more, because that's the message we're putting out, right?
Yeah.